The alley stank of desperation and rotting garbage, a scent Leah knew better than perfume. Two men, built like brick outhouses with faces to match, had her pinned against the grimy wall. Their leader, a weasel named Sal, leered, his breath a foul mix of stale smoke and cheap wine. The debt is due, Dulcetsa. Your late husband was a fool. A debt of honor must be paid. Leah's chin was high, her eyes spitting a fire they couldn't extinguish. I have nothing left to give you, she hissed, her hands clenched into fists. Sal chuckled, a wet, ugly sound. Oh, you have plenty. You just don't want to part with it. His hand snaked out, grabbing her arm. The pressure was a vice grip, bruising bone. It was then that a small cry pierced the tension. They're hurting my mommy. Her son Leo, no older than 6, stood at the mouth of the alley, his small face a mask of terror and fury. He had been told to wait, to stay hidden. But his heart had overruled his mind. Sal's men laughed. Look at the little lion, one grunted. But Sal's eyes narrowed, annoyed by the interruption. He backhanded Leah across the face, the crack echoing off the bricks. Keep your cub on a leash. Leo didn't flinch. He ran. Not away but forward, past them, toward the main street where the evening lights of the city bled into the twilight. He ran toward a figure standing in the shadows, a man who seemed to absorb the light around him, dressed in a suit so black it was a tear in the fabric of the world. The boy didn't know who he was, only that he was big, and the bad men were scared of him. Leo crashed into an impeccably tailored leg, his small hands grabbing the expensive wool. Please, mister, he sobbed, his voice cracking. They're hurting my mommy. The man looked down. His face was all sharp angles and shadows, a sculpture of brutal elegance. His eyes, the color of storm clouds, held a terrifying stillness. This was Nico the Ghost Volpe, a man whose name was only ever whispered, a phantom who ruled the city's dark heart. Sal and his men froze, their blood turning to ice. They recognized the silhouette, the aura of absolute power. Sal's bravado evaporated, replaced by a primal fear. Nico's gaze lifted from the boy to the scene in the alley. He saw the thugs, the weasel in charge, and the woman against the wall. He saw the red mark blooming on her cheek, the defiance in her posture, the ferocity in her eyes that mirrored the little boy's at his feet. A flicker of something ancient and possessive stirred in his chest. He took a slow, deliberate step forward, the sound of his leather shoes on the pavement like a death knell. The air crackled. The block, once humming with life, fell into a stunned, reverent silence. Nico Volpe was here. And hell had just followed him into the alley. Nico's voice was low, a gravelly whisper that carried more menace than a shout. Lucila. Let her go. Sal scrambled to obey, his hands flying off Leah as if she were suddenly engulfed in flames. He bowed his head, sweat beading on his forehead. Boss Volpe, he stammered, his voice trembling. A misunderstanding. Just collecting a business debt. Nico's eyes didn't leave Leah. He drank her in, the tangled chestnut hair, the proud set of her jaw, the fire that even fear couldn't quench. He saw a queen in rags. Then his gaze dropped to the red handprint on her face, and the air grew 10 degrees colder. You put your hands on her, he stated, not a question but a final judgment. He didn't need to raise his voice. His stillness was more terrifying than any rage. He made a subtle gesture with his hand, a flick of the wrist. 2 of his own men materialized from the shadows behind him, silent and lethal. They seized Sal's men, who went limp with terror, knowing any resistance was futile. Nico walked toward Sal, his steps unhurried. He stopped directly in front of the trembling thug, his shadow engulfing him completely. The Volpe family does not tolerate disrespect toward women and children in its territory, he said softly, the words a silken threat. And everything this light touches, he gestured vaguely to the sprawling city, is my territory. He reached out, not to strike, but to gently adjust Sal's collar. The feigned intimacy was a viper's caress. So, I will collect a debt from you now. For the insult, the sounds that followed were sickeningly quick. A sharp crack of bone, a choked gurgle. Sal crumpled to the ground, a broken mess. Nico wiped his knuckles with a pristine handkerchief, his expression unreadable. He turned his attention back to Leah, who watched him with wide, wary eyes, her arm protectively around Leo. He will not bother you again, Nico said. He looked at the boy, who was staring at him with awe, not fear. A ghost of a smile touched Nico's lips, so fleeting it might have been a trick of the light. You have a brave son. Un Leon Piccolo. He then looked back at Lia, his gaze intense, proprietary. The debt is erased. But now you have a new one. To me, Lia stiffened. I didn't ask for your help. You didn't have to, he replied, his voice dropping to a possessive murmur. From this moment on, you and the boy are under my protection. You belong to me now. It wasn't a request. It was a decree. A cage of gold and steel had just snapped shut around her, and the man holding the key was the most dangerous predator in the entire city. The villa was a masterpiece of cold opulence, a palace of marble floors, soaring ceilings, and windows that overlooked the glittering sprawl of the city Nico commanded. To Lia, it felt like the most beautiful prison ever constructed. She was given a suite of rooms that were larger than her entire apartment, with a closet filled with silk gowns and designer clothes she refused to touch. She lived in her own simple dresses, a silent act of defiance. Leo, however, was enchanted. He explored the vast gardens, chased butterflies, and swam in a pool that shimmered like a sapphire. The staff treated him like a young prince, and for the first time in his life, he didn't have to hear his mother worry about rent or food. This was Nico's most insidious weapon. Her son's happiness. Lia clashed with Nico at every opportunity. He was a storm and she was an unbending tree. I am not one of your possessions, Signor Volpe, she'd say, her voice laced with contempt. He would simply watch her, a smirk playing on his lips, infuriatingly calm. Everything in my house is my possession, Mia Cara. You are in my house. He would try to gift her jewels. A diamond necklace that felt like a collar, emerald earrings that felt like gilded shackles. She would leave them untouched on her vanity. Your generosity is a cage, she told him one evening, as he stood in the doorway of her balcony, a silhouette against the sunset. Perhaps, he conceded, stepping closer. The scent of expensive cologne and something uniquely him, musk and danger, filled the air. But is it not better to be a songbird in a golden cage than a sparrow starving in the gutter? His proximity was overwhelming. He was a man of immense physical presence, radiating a power that made the air hum. He saw the flicker of fear in her eyes, but also the stubborn pride. Fascinated him. He was surrounded by sycophants and enemies, people who either feared him or wanted to be him. But this woman, this slip of a thing with the heart of a lioness, she looked at him and saw only a man. A monster perhaps, but a man nonetheless. And in the dead of night, when the ghosts of his past whispered of betrayal and loss, Nico would stand outside her door, listening to the soft sounds of her breathing, and wonder if this captive fire was the only thing that could burn away the ice around his own heart. He craved her defiance because it was real. It was the only real thing in his world of lies. The true bridge between their worlds was built by the small hands of a child. Leo, unlike the hardened men who populated Nico's life, held no fear of the dark king of their castle. One afternoon he found Nico in his study, a cavernous room of dark wood and leather, staring at a chessboard. The Don was lost in thought, a formidable, untouchable figure. Leo walked right up to him, holding a slightly battered toy soldier. Can he be on your team? The boy asked, his voice earnest. Nico looked down, startled from his reverie. He stared at the plastic soldier, then at the boy's hopeful face. No one had ever offered to be on his team without wanting something in return. A slow, genuine smile, a true rarity, touched Nico's lips. Of course, he said, his voice softer than Leah had ever heard it. He placed the toy soldier next to his marble queen. He will protect the queen. From that day on, an unlikely friendship blossomed. Leo would follow Nico around the villa, chattering about his day, asking endless questions that chipped away at Nico's carefully constructed armor. Do you have a mommy? Why are your hands so rough? Are you sad? The questions were simple, innocent, yet they struck at the very core of the man Nico had buried long ago. Leah watched these interactions from a distance, her heart a battlefield of conflicting emotions. She saw a side of Nico she never thought possible. One evening, she heard a noise and found Nico in Leo's room, sitting on the edge of the bed. Her son had had a nightmare, and Nico was there, his large, calloused hand gently stroking the boy's hair. He was murmuring something in soft Italian, a lullaby his own mother had sung to him. The ruthless Mafia Don, the ghost who made the city tremble, was comforting her child with a tenderness that made her ache. In that moment the monster receded and she saw the man beneath. A man scarred and lonely, a man who had forgotten what it felt like to be loved without condition. She stood in the shadows of the hallway, a hand pressed to her lips, as a single tear traced a path down her cheek. The golden bars of her cage were beginning to look less like a prison and more like a sanctuary, and the man who held the key was becoming dangerously, terrifyingly human. Her defiance began to melt, replaced by a perilous curiosity about the heart of the man she was supposed to hate. While a fragile peace settled within the villa's walls, a storm was brewing outside. Nico's cousin and underboss, Ricardo Volpe, watched the Don's transformation with a venomous envy. Ricardo was a man of ambition, slick and smiling on the surface but rotten to the core. He had always coveted Nico's throne, and he saw Leah and the boy not as a curiosity, but as a fatal weakness, an infection in the family's strength. He softens, Ricardo would whisper to the other capos in smoke-filled back rooms. This woman and her bastard child, they have dulled his edge. The ghost is becoming a man, and a man can be killed. He fanned the flames of discontent, preying on the fears of the old guard who believed in the cold, hard traditions of their world. Nico's loyal consigliere Giorgio, a man whose weathered face was a roadmap of the family's history, saw the danger clearly. He approached Nico in his study, his expression grave. "Boss," he said, foregoing pleasantries. "The whispers in the street are growing louder. They say your attention is divided." Nico looked up from his paperwork, his eyes sharp. "Let them whisper." "This is more than whispers," Giorgio pressed, his voice low. "It's about the woman. Ricardo uses her as a symbol of your weakness. He tells them you've traded the family for a skirt and a kid." Nico's jaw tightened. "Ricardo is my blood. Blood is the easiest thing to spill," Giorgio countered, his tone heavy with warning. "You brought a dove into a nest of vipers, Nico. They will see her as prey. Love in our world, it's worse than a hit. A bullet is quick, clean. Love leaves a mess that can bring down an entire empire. Be careful who you trust." Nico waved him off, a dismissive gesture that didn't quite mask the flicker of unease in his eyes. He was the ghost, untouchable and all-powerful. He refused to believe that a threat could come from within his own house, from his own family. But Giorgio's words lingered in the air long after he left, a chilling prophecy of the betrayal that was already coiling in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Ricardo smiled his serpent's smile, knowing the Don's greatest strength, his newfound heart, was about to become his most exploitable vulnerability. The tension between Nico and Leah had become a living thing, a palpable energy that crackled in the space between them. It was a war of wills, a dance of defiance and desire. One night, a thunderstorm raged outside, mirroring the tempest in Leah's soul. She found him on the grand terrace, watching the lightning split the sky, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. The wind whipped her simple cotton dress around her legs and tore strands of hair from her braid. "You look like you belong in the storm," he said, turning to her. His eyes were dark, intense, reflecting the violent beauty of the night. "I am the storm," she retorted, her voice barely a whisper against the wind. "And you are the man who thinks he can command the thunder." He set his glass down and closed the distance between them. Rain began to fall, plastering his white shirt to the hard plains of his chest. "I don't want to command you, Leah," he murmured, his voice a low growl. "I want to be consumed by you." He cupped her face, his thumb tracing the curve of her jaw, a touch that was both possessive and impossibly gentle. All her defenses, all her righteous anger, crumbled into dust. She saw the raw vulnerability in his eyes, the desperate plea of a man drowning in his own darkness, reaching for a single point of light. She leaned in and he met her halfway. The kiss was not gentle. It was a collision, a desperate, hungry claiming. It was rain and whiskey and lightning, a release of all the unspoken words, the simmering anger, and the forbidden longing that had tormented them for weeks. It was a surrender and a victory all at once. At that very moment across the city, Ricardo's plan was igniting. An explosion rocked one of Nico's waterfront warehouses, a blast so powerful it shattered windows for blocks. Sirens screamed through the night. Ricardo had used a rival family's signature explosive, a calculated move designed to frame the Grimaldi clan and plunge the city into a turf war. As Nico held Leah, lost in a kiss that sealed their fate, the foundations of his empire began to crack. Ricardo had lit the match, confident that the Don, blinded by his newfound passion, would be too distracted to see the true enemy standing right beside him. The first move had been made, and the board was now set for a game of betrayal and blood. The chaos Ricardo had engineered served as the perfect smokescreen. With Nico consumed by the escalating war with the Grimaldi family, his attention was fractured, just as his cousin had planned. Ricardo saw his window of opportunity. His objective was simple and brutal: remove the distraction. He hired mercenaries from outside the city, men with no loyalty to any local family, and gave them their instructions. It was to look like a retaliatory strike from the Grimaldis, a kidnapping to be used as leverage against the mighty Nico Volpe. They were to grab the woman and her son. What happened to them afterward, Ricardo implied with a cold smile, was of little consequence. Leah was in the public market with Leo, a rare outing she had insisted upon, flanked by two of Nico's guards. She craved a sliver of normalcy, the feel of fresh fruit in her hands, the buzz of everyday life. But normalcy was a luxury she no longer had. A black van screeched to a halt beside them. Men in ski masks swarmed out, moving with professional, brutal efficiency. Nico's guards were skilled, but they were outnumbered and taken by surprise. Gunshots erupted, sending the crowd screaming and scattering. One guard fell, a crimson flower blooming on his chest. The other fought valiantly before being overwhelmed. Leah grabbed Leo, her heart hammering against her ribs. She tried to run to shield him with her body, but a powerful arm wrapped around her waist, lifting her off her feet. Another masked man snatched Leo. The boy kicked and screamed, his cries of "Mommy!" tearing through Leah's soul. She fought like a cornered tigress, biting, scratching, but it was useless. They were thrown into the back of the van, the doors slamming shut, plunging them into darkness and terror. The last thing Leah saw was the insignia on the back of one man's neck, a coiled serpent eating its own tail. It meant nothing to her, but it was an arrogant mistake by a mercenary who didn't know the intricate symbols of the city's underworld. Ricardo had made his move. He had taken Nico's queen and his heir apparent, believing he had checkmated the king. He had severely underestimated the fury of a ghost, when the one thing he holds sacred is stolen from him. When the news reached Nico, the cold, controlled facade he presented to the world shattered into a million pieces. The rage that erupted from him was a physical force, a palpable wave of black fury that made even his most hardened men take a step back. This wasn't business. This wasn't a war over territory or respect. This was personal. His world, which had just begun to find a center, had been ripped apart. "Find them!" he roared, his voice echoing through the marble halls of the villa. It wasn't an order. It was a vow of damnation for those responsible. He became the ghost in truth. He moved through the city's underbelly not as a dawn, but as a wraith of vengeance. He tore through Grimaldi fronts, leaving a trail of broken men and terrified whispers in his wake. But the Grimaldis were genuinely clueless, their fear too real to be faked. They knew nothing. It was Giorgio, the wise consigliere, who provided the crucial piece of the puzzle. The surviving guard, wounded but alive, described the attack, its professionalism, its speed. And he mentioned the insignia Leah had seen. The Ouroboros, the serpent eating its tail. "That is not a Grimaldi symbol," Giorgio said, his voice grim. "It's the mark of the Serpentelli mercenaries. Hired guns. No loyalty. Someone paid them." The pieces clicked into place in Nico's mind with horrifying clarity. The perfectly timed war. The surgical strike. The whispers of his weakness. It all pointed inward. It pointed to his own blood. He found one of the mercenaries cowering in a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city. The man didn't stand a chance. Under Nico's cold, terrifying pressure, he broke. He confessed everything, spitting out the name that confirmed Nico's darkest suspicion: Ricardo. He had ordered the kidnapping. They were holding Leah and Leo in an abandoned cannery by the docks. The fury in Nico's eyes solidified into something colder, sharper, and infinitely more deadly. He had been betrayed by his own family. Ricardo hadn't just stolen the woman he was coming to love. He had threatened his son in all but blood. He had signed his own death warrant. Nico gathered his most loyal men. "We're going to the cannery," he said, his voice deceptively calm. "Bring them back to me. Unharmed. Leave everyone else for me." The hunt was over. The execution was about to begin. The cannery reeked of rust and decay, a metal tomb on the forgotten edge of the docks. Leah held Leo close, whispering reassurances she didn't feel, her mind racing. She had one purpose: to keep her son safe. When the doors to the cavernous room burst open, it wasn't a rescue team of police that stormed in, but a disciplined unit of shadows, moving with silent, lethal grace. Nico's men. The firefight was brutally short. The mercenaries were professionals, but Nico's men were loyalists fighting for their king. At the center of the storm was Nico himself. He moved through the chaos like a phantom, his focus singular, his violence an art form. He dispatched 2 men before they could even raise their weapons, his movements a blur of controlled fury. He saw Leah and Leo, huddled behind a stack of rusted barrels, and his heart clenched. He met her eyes across the room, and in that single shared glance, a universe of promises was made and understood. While his men secured the area, Nico strode directly to her. He knelt, ignoring the carnage around them, and gently touched Leo's hair. "It's over, Leon Piccolo. You're safe." He then looked at Leah, his gaze sweeping over her, checking for any injury. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, her body trembling with adrenaline and relief. "We're okay." He helped her to her feet, his touch lingering, a silent vow of protection. The immediate threat was neutralized, but the true battle was yet to come. Later that night, back in the villa, Nico convened a meeting. He sat at the head of a long mahogany table, flanked by Giorgio. His capos stood, their faces grim. The doors opened and Ricardo was marched in, held between 2 of Nico's most formidable soldiers. Ricardo's face was pale, but he tried to maintain an air of arrogant defiance. "Cousin," he began. "A bold move summoning me like this." Nico didn't speak. He simply placed a small object on the table and slid it across the polished wood. It was a cufflink shaped like a coiled serpent. Ouroboros, one of the captured mercenaries, had been wearing it, a gift from his benefactor. Ricardo's blood ran cold. The mask of defiance shattered, replaced by pure, unadulterated fear. "You broke the code," Nico said, his voice a low, deadly whisper. "You betrayed your own family. You targeted a woman and a child. For what? For this chair." He gestured to his seat at the head of the table. "You will never sit in it." The judgment was swift, brutal, and final, carried out according to the old ways. Ricardo's fall was absolute, a stark message to anyone who would ever mistake Nico's heart for a weakness again. It was a cleansing of the poison from within his own house, an act of justice not for power, but for the new family he would die to protect. The city seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief as the brief, violent turf war ended as abruptly as it began. The Volpe family was stronger than ever, its foundations reset not on fear alone, but on a new unshakable loyalty to a Don who had shown he would burn the world down for those he claimed as his own. The villa, once a gilded cage for Leah, transformed. The silence was no longer heavy with tension, but filled with a comfortable peace. The shadows that once held monsters now seemed to offer a protective embrace. One evening, Nico found Leah and Leo in the garden, planting a small rose bush. Leo was digging in the dirt with happy abandon, while Leah gently placed the young plant into the soil. Nico watched them, a sight of simple domestic bliss he never thought he'd witness, let alone be a part of. He walked over, his presence no longer causing her to stiffen. She looked up and smiled, a genuine unguarded smile that struck him more profoundly than any bullet ever could. "We're planting a white rose," she said. "For new beginnings." He knelt beside her, his expensive suit befitting the dirt. He looked at her, his expression serious, the weight of his world in his eyes. "Leah," he began, his voice raw with an emotion he was still learning to name. "This life, it is a violent one. I cannot change what I am overnight, but I am changing. You and Leo have changed me." He took her hand, his callous fingers interlacing with hers. "I don't want you to be my captive. I don't want this to be your cage. I want it to be your home." Our home, he paused, his gaze unwavering. Be my queen, Leah. Not as a possession but as my partner. Rule this kingdom with me. Let me be a father to your son. Tears welled in Leah's eyes, but they were not tears of sadness or fear. They were tears of hope. She had seen the darkness in this man, but she had also seen his light. She had seen him comfort her son and bring an empire to its knees for their safety. She squeezed his hand. Yes, she whispered. The word was simple, but it sealed their future. They were a strange, impossible family. A reformed king, a defiant queen, and a little prince who had tamed the beast. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the garden, they stood together, a united front, overlooking the glittering city that was now their shared domain. Can a heart forged in darkness truly learn to love the light? Can a love born from captivity ever truly be free? Perhaps the answer lies not in changing who you are, but in finding the one person who makes your darkness feel like home. What do you think? Share your story of a love that conquered all odds in the comments below. And don't forget to share this story if you believe in the power of a dangerous, redemptive love.